This episode is presented to you in the form of an audio podcast. Imagine you're walking into a room filled with people you barely know. Your heart starts to race, your palms get sweaty, and a single thought echoes in your mind. They're all looking at me. This is how social anxiety feels for many of us. The constant awareness of how we might be judged or perceived can be overwhelming, leading us to believe that the safest option is to hide or avoid people altogether. Social anxiety is often described as a persistent, intense fear of social or performance situations where embarrassment may occur in everyday life. It can pop up in scenarios as simple as saying hello to a neighbor or as daunting as giving a presentation at school or work. Today, we're exploring the underpinnings of social anxiety and how it can shape our lives. We'll refer to the ideas of psychologists like David Clark and Beck, who have done extensive work on cognitive behavioral therapy, and we'll look at how their frameworks explain the roots of our fears. For anyone struggling with social anxiety, it can feel like the fear is just who you are. You might feel naturally shy or think you were born to be uncomfortable around others, but psychologists argue that many of these feelings stem from the beliefs and assumptions we develop over time. Let's start by talking about why we become so hyper-aware of other people's judgments. At its core, social anxiety is linked to our deep desire for acceptance and belonging. Historically, humans needed social acceptance for survival. We lived in close-knit tribes. If people rejected you, it could have dire consequences. So, although society has changed, our brains are still wired to avoid being cast out from the group. As a result, criticism or judgment hits us in our most vulnerable spots because being disliked on any level triggers that primal fear. Now, it's not always a conscious thought, but whenever you feel that wave of anxiety in a crowd or the dread of an upcoming social gathering, what's really happening under the surface is your brain interpreting a possible threat. According to the cognitive perspective, especially the model introduced by Clark and Wells, social anxiety is maintained by certain thought patterns. Think of it this way. You might have a belief like, "I'm terrible at conversations. People will notice how nervous I am." With that belief firmly in place, your mind goes on high alert, scanning every interaction for signs that someone might confirm your fear. Maybe your voice wavers for half a second, and you notice a slight change in someone's expression. You immediately assume they figured out you're incompetent and are judging you harshly. In reality, they might have just remembered they left their phone in the car, but your anxious mind fills in the worst possible explanation. These thoughts create a feedback loop, reinforcing the idea that you can't handle social situations. Now let's consider how this might impact your daily life. You could be a high school student avoiding clubs or teams that require group work. Maybe you're a college student dropping out of a class because there's a group presentation on the syllabus. You could be a professional who refuses promotions just to dodge the networking events or client presentations required at higher levels. Over time, this avoidance strategy shrinks your world, and while it might bring temporary relief, it also denies you the experiences that might challenge the anxious beliefs and gradually help you grow in confidence. Psychologists suggest that avoidance feels safe, but it's actually a trap. It reinforces the idea that social interactions are dangerous. Every time you avoid, you confirm to yourself that socializing is a high-stakes event from which escape is necessary. On the other hand, if you can learn to tolerate the initial discomfort, you might discover that you have more resilience than you think. You might stumble over a word or two in a conversation, but guess what? The world won't end, and in many cases, people won't even remember that slight hiccup the next day. Interestingly, research points to a combination of genetic and environmental factors that contribute to social anxiety. You could have a biological predisposition. Maybe certain brain circuits related to threat detection are extra sensitive. On top of that, your childhood experiences may have shaped how you interpret social cues. Perhaps you grew up with critical caregivers, or you had peers who teased you in grade school. These environmental cues taught you that social settings are unpredictable or even hostile, so your mind tries to protect you by over-preparing or escaping entirely from perceived threats. But there's good news. While genetics and early experiences matter, they don't dictate your entire future. Even the most deeply rooted social fears can shift with the right approach. Now let's address the big question. If overcoming social anxiety is possible, why do so many people remain stuck? Many experts believe it's because stepping out of the cycle of avoidance requires a certain kind of courage. It's not the courage to be loud or flashy in front of others, but the courage to experience fear and stay there without immediately retreating or self-sabotaging. For instance, David Clarke's approach to cognitive behavioral therapy often involves structured exposures, which ask you to slowly and safely face the situations you dread the most. It's not about throwing yourself into a massive crowd on day one, but about taking small, realistic steps. Maybe you start by making eye contact and saying hello to a cashier at the grocery store, or by sharing one brief comment in a group meeting at school or work. The idea is that once you realize these interactions are safe, you get evidence that counters your negative assumptions, and your anxiety gradually decreases. The next piece of the puzzle is thought restructuring. Under social anxiety, your thoughts might tell you everyone hates you, or that people are definitely talking about how awkward you seem. Instead of instantly believing these thoughts, imagine stepping back and asking for evidence. Is it really true that everyone hates you? Can you point to actual events that confirm this? Or is it possible your anxious mind is projecting fear onto neutral situations? Maybe you recall a conversation that ended with genuine smiles. Maybe a friend invited you to hang out last week, and you forgot about that because your mind focuses on negatives more than positives. By collecting evidence for and against your anxious beliefs, you might discover those beliefs are more like assumptions than facts. Some people also find mindfulness or acceptance-based practices helpful. These approaches encourage you to notice anxious thoughts without becoming fused with them. You might think, I'm worried they'll laugh at me if I speak up. But instead of spiraling, you simply label it as, there's my anxiety talking again, and shift your focus back to what's actually happening. Maybe you realize no one else is paying that much attention. Everyone's checking their phones or having their own conversations. Acceptance-based approaches don't necessarily ask you to dispute every anxious thought, but rather to acknowledge them and let them pass through. Another aspect we can't ignore is how social media feeds into social anxiety. In the past, social pressure came from your immediate circle of friends and family, or maybe classmates at school, but today, it can feel like the entire world can judge you at once. With every post, story, or tweet, people often curate perfect highlight reels that lead you to compare your real, messy life to their meticulously polished image. If you're socially anxious, that comparison might reinforce the idea that you're doing something wrong or failing to measure up. Ironically, the more you worry about how you come across online, the more anxious you might feel in face-to-face encounters, because your brain is so used to monitoring for judgment. Some individuals self-medicate with alcohol or substances to cope with their social anxiety. Though it can provide brief relief, it often makes the problem worse in the long run. Dependency on external aids prevents you from building genuine confidence and resilience. Instead of learning that you can handle social situations sober, you start to believe you can only handle them with a drink or two in your system. It becomes another avoidance pattern, simply disguised as a temporary solution. A crucial point from many experts is that overcoming social anxiety doesn't mean you'll never feel nervous again. People without social anxiety still feel jittery before public speaking or going on a first date. The difference is they interpret those nerves as normal or even as excitement, rather than as a threat. You can't eliminate all fear from life, but you can change how you respond to it. You can learn to see fear as a signal that you're stepping out of your comfort zone and possibly into a place of growth. A question that often arises is whether caring about others' opinions is always bad. It's normal to value meaningful feedback and want close friends or family to think well of you. The problem is when that desire for approval becomes an absolute need. When your sense of self-worth hinges on whether or not someone else smiles at your joke or compliments your outfit. Ironically, the more you chase universal approval, the more anxiety you'll create. Because no matter how likable you are, someone somewhere could still disapprove or criticize you. The freedom from social anxiety partially lies in accepting that not everyone will get you, and that's okay. So, how can we move toward that freedom? It starts with small actions and a willingness to face discomfort. If you practice exposures consistently, you'll find your tolerance for perceived judgment grows. But exposures alone aren't enough. You also have to peel back the layers of negative self-beliefs that drive your anxiety. It might help to remind yourself of times you succeeded socially, even if the successes seem minor. Noticing these moments helps counteract the negativity bias that keeps your anxiety alive. You might also write down the strengths or qualities you bring to a relationship. Maybe you're an empathetic listener, or you're creative and bring unique ideas to group projects. In other words, you're shifting the focus from how you might fail or be judged to what you can contribute. Another tip from therapists is to actively seek out supportive people. If you have friends or family who understand social anxiety, let them know how you feel. Sometimes sharing that you get anxious can relieve the pressure to appear perfect. Maybe you tell a close friend, "I get super nervous in group settings. Is it okay if I hang near you at the party until I warm up a bit?" A simple plan like that can reduce a significant amount of stress because you've communicated your needs instead of silently panicking about them. Overcoming social anxiety is a process. It's not a sudden transformation where you wake up fearless one day, but rather a gradual shift in how you perceive yourself and others. It's learning that it's okay to be nervous or stumble over your words, and that these moments don't define your entire worth. It's also discovering that most people are more concerned with themselves than they are with judging you. You'll find that acknowledging your anxiety and working through it is not a sign of weakness, but an act of courage. As we wrap up, remember that small steps taken consistently can lead to significant changes. You might challenge yourself to speak up once in a small group, or attend a social event for half an hour instead of skipping it altogether. Any progress, however modest, counts. By collecting these small wins, you build evidence that you're capable of facing the situations your anxious mind tells you to avoid. You begin to rewrite the story that says, "I can't handle it," into "I'm doing it, even if it's hard." Ultimately, social anxiety doesn't have to dictate your path. You can seek support, whether it's through professional therapy, reliable friends, or simply educating yourself about how anxiety works. And you can learn to step beyond the confines of fear and reclaim spaces in your life that social anxiety might have shrunk over time. It's about embracing the truth that nervousness is just one part of the human experience. It doesn't have to be the whole story. So, if you've been letting social anxiety hold you back, today is an invitation to lean into the fear just a little bit, to see what happens when you trust that you are more than your anxious thoughts, and to discover that on the other side of worry lies growth, connection, and the possibility of a richer, more authentic life. That's all for today on your Inner Voice podcast. I hope it was helpful, and I will see you in next episode.